Hello, my name is Dr. Quinton Hennigh. I'm a director of Newfound Gold. I'm also a technical advisor. It's a wonderful story to tell. This is a new discovery in Newfoundland. It's an exceptionally high-grade discovery, and it's a somewhat unique style of mineralization or deposit here on planet Earth, but it's got enormous potential. These are truly gems, in this case, gem in the rough. We're going to talk about the geology a bit. I don't want to cause people's eyes to roll back in their head here, but I'm going to at least explain some of the basics around these particular types of deposits. What we're dealing with at the Queensway project in Newfoundland is an orogenic gold deposit. Okay, the term orogenic is simply referring to mountain building. It was associated with the mountain building process. I'll go into a little bit more detail here in a second, but we'll just leave it at that. The short version is this. When you have compression in plate tectonics, when two plates come together, when they collide against one another, it causes a lot of stress. You end up breaking, causing big faults to open in the ground that can go clear down to the bottom of the crust. And what we're looking at here is a schematic section. This is basically a cartoon rendition of how a system such as this looks as you go from surface all the way down into the deeper parts of the crust. All right, so in this environment, you create a huge amount of heat and pressure down at depth. And in doing so, a lot of fluid starts to come out of the rock. Believe it or not, rock has a fair bit of water dissolved in it. If you think about sediments, for example, as they're laid down, a little bit of water is trapped in with those sediments. And so when they end up, getting caught up in this collision, that water wants to come out of those rocks. And what it does is it scavenges metals. It scavenges quite a few different types of metals, but in particular, in our case, it scavenged gold. So way down there at the bottom, you start pulling the metal out of the rock, and you start reprecipitating that into faults and fissures and fractures in the ground, and you start producing gold deposits. It's a wonderful process. And the process really starts way, way down on the ground. You can see the scale on the right-hand side. Those numbers are actually kilometers depth, okay? So we're looking at different levels within the system. They go down 20, sometimes more than 20 kilometers. In the deep, deep environment, we call these orogenic deposits hypozonal. As we come up, you can see the term mesozonal. Those are simply referring to the depth at which these form. The hypo meaning deep, meso meaning middle, and then up there where the red circle is, we have our epizonal gold deposits. You can see a dash SB. What does that mean? SB is antimony. Antimony is frequently associated with these higher level deposits. Epi, think about epidermis. Epi means the surface. So these deposits are actually forming in a very shallow environment, say within, a kilometer or two of surface, which is quite shallow with respect to the overall system. Right, but in this environment, you can form wonderful high-grade gold deposits. As those fluids come out of the ground and they start to cool and their chemistry starts to change, a lot of great things happen. And one of those is that the gold that's dissolved in the fluid is no longer stable in that solution. Okay, it has to come out. It basically has to precipitate out. And in this epizonal regime, as those fluids come up, they start to deposit gold very, very rapidly. What does that mean? It means high grades. Okay, you can form extremely high grades in this type of gold system. Okay, so we're going to look at the environment. I told you about the collision, that's involved in this process. And what you're seeing here is basically a cross-sectional view. It's like a little cartoon rendition of what we call a convergent margin, a place where plates are colliding. So on the left-hand side over there where it says four-arc basement, that's basically the edge of a plate. And then this green sheet that's, diving under that is another plate. Okay, so you have one plate going underneath another. As they do so, all of those sediments that are on the oceanic crust, this green plate, all of those are scraped off. It's almost like a giant snow shovel. If you've ever shoveled wet snow, as you go down the sidewalk, you kind of build up a mound of snow in front of the shovel. and you can start to see little faults and stuff form. Well, the same thing happens in a much, much bigger scale here. You know, if you think of this as like a snow shovel, all those sediments that were on top of the oceanic crust, they start getting glommed onto the edge of the plate that the oceanic crust is diving under. Okay, so they build up and they form what's called an accretionary wedge. You know, it's kind of got a wedge shape to it. It's a bit of a triangle. So we call it an accretionary wedge. And this is the environment where you get that heat start to build up and you get faulting and so forth that allows those fluids to rise up to surface. And this is that wonderful environment where these things form. Now, this is a bit of a static view. Like this is a process that takes, you know, tens to maybe hundreds of million, 200 or 300 million years. But, you know, this gives you a sense of the environment that these things form. They're big, big systems. You know, they go way down on the ground. These faults, you know, to give you a sense of scale, we're looking at a profile of maybe 30 kilometers of crust. You know, the upper part of Earth's, you know, Earth's crust and upper mantle here. So these are big, big, big systems. That's what you need to form big, big gold deposits. All right. Now, I'm simply going to talk about the different styles of deposits you get with this process. Okay, there's actually kind of a spectrum of styles. You can get what we call stratiform deposits. That's what you see on the left. And when I say stratiform, the fluids that come up, they sometimes they find a layer that soaks them up like a sponge. Okay, they simply, you know, soak these fluids up, and the gold deposits in that layer, and it produces a blanket or layer-like deposit. We call it stratiform. Strata meaning layer, and then form meaning it takes the shape thereof. Okay, so that's one style. Another style we get what are called saddle reefs or quartz reefs. They tend to follow the tops of folds. As these rocks are squished, they often get folded. And in quartz reefs, such as the ones you see in the middle there, they form kind of a saddle-like geometry, you know, an upward bowing geometry. Many gold deposits around the world take this form. It's not what we're dealing with. Okay, now the ones on the right-hand side, those are the style that we're dealing with. Again, when you compress rock, it starts to fold. And those fold axes where you fold things, they start to buckle along that axis. And what that does is it allows faulting and fluids to focus their way into that structure. That fold axis takes up those fluids, and they can travel all the way up through the ground, the crust. And that's the kind of environment we're dealing with apparently at Queensway. From everything I've seen, we are dealing with fold controlled or fold thrust controlled structures like this. So we're looking for, you know, we'll call it veins or vertical LODE systems that go down into the ground. Okay, let's take a little bit deeper look at these structures. This diagram really shows you how rock breaks as you go down into the ground. Okay, up at surface, where there's not much pressure to hold the rock together, you can get brittle fracturing, you know, very intense fracturing. And this would include things we call breccias. When you break up the rock and form a new rock that's made out of rock fragments, it's called a breccia. You also get stockworks when the ground just breaks and breaks and breaks, and you get crisscrossing little fractures and whatnot. You call it a stockwork. As you go deeper in the ground, though, the pressure starts to increase and starts to kind of, you know, confine the stresses, and you end up with nice or clean or more organized fractures in the ground. And that's what you can see as we go down. So we've got, you know, a pretty well-defined structural regime where you have main structures, maybe a few secondary structures coming off in the red circle there. That's the kind of environment we see at Queensway. You know, these are the kind of structures that host the mineralization. You know, you might have one principal one, but you might have smaller secondary ones, but it's not going to be a big volume of stockwork or breccia or something like this. We're a bit deeper in the system. That's actually a good thing. It means all the gold is confined in those structures. That's what we want to see. Okay, one of the things about Newfound that attracted me right away, this is going back to January of 2020. When I first got to see some of the pictures of core, and then I actually got to go to site in late January, I was astounded at the similarities between the Queensway project and core that I was fortunate to see at Fosterville Mine back in 2016. A little history. Fosterville is in Australia. It's in Victoria. Fosterville is well known right now. It's one of Kirkland Lake's flagship operations. And, quite frankly, it was a low-grade mine for many, many, many years. They mined a bit of open pit early on, and then they started to mine underground. The grades were like 4 or 5 grams, and they mined this thing. They were basically trading money for a long, long time. Okay, so as they mined these structures, these lodes down and deeper into the ground, something incredible happened around late 2015 as they were, incrementally mining and doing exploration in advance of mining. They started to hit some extremely high-grade mineralization. The other thing was the style of it changed. It wasn't just the same kind of the sulfide boring mineralization anymore that they had been mining for a decade or more. It changed very abruptly. What they saw and what I got to see early on was that the quartz veining increased dramatically. You ended up with intense local stockworks. In this case, they're very local stockwork, but you can see the photos on the left-hand side of this image. You can see the comparison between Fosterville and Queensway. Saw the same thing at Queensway. Okay, that's remarkable. Now, at Fosterville, as they went deeper, it became, these high-grade veins that they started to encounter became more organized, and they looked, very organized. You saw cryptic banding, like we see on the right-hand side here, and oftentimes the gold is associated with that banding, right? So once again, I saw the same thing at Queensway. I mean, this is remarkable. So, to see the same style of mineralization, completely independent geographically is remarkable. You have Victoria, Australia, which is basically the polar opposite side of the planet from Queensway, yet you have the same style of mineralization. And it gets better yet. The host rocks, believe it or not, I kid you not, the host rocks are virtually identical in terms of composition and age. They go back to the Ordovician, what we call the Ordovician, which is on the order of 450 to 500 million years ago. It's quite a long time ago that these rocks were laid down. Astoundingly, you generated these systems independently. You might say, well, my gosh, how on earth do you have one thing over here and another thing over here that looked so much alike? Well, think plate tectonics. Okay, these used to be much closer to one another. I'm not saying they were right next door, but if you look back in time, that whole belt, that whole accretionary prism or wedge that I talked about earlier, actually formed the margin of the ancient continent back in that day. And that's the environment these things formed in. And yes, there are more of them around the world. We'll find them. Okay, let's go to a little bit more comparison. This is what really got me excited at Fosterville. Okay, now normally in orogenic deposits, like 99% of the time, erosion has taken off that epizonal top. It's not there anymore. Okay, think about it. These things formed through mountain building. If you push up mountains, the tops of the mountains invariably weather away with time. Yet here we are, at Fosterville, I got to see right away these things we call vugs in the quartz. This sounds esoteric, but it's actually really, really important. Okay, if you have little cavities like you see on the left-hand side there, right underneath where it says Fosterville Mine, you can see little tiny cavities in the quartz. And those cavities have little crystals of quartz growing inside of them. To form that, it must not have been under too much pressure. Think about it. If it was under a lot of pressure, you would have no cavities. The ground would have pushed itself together and all those cavities would have sealed up like, just basically non-existent. But here we are. We have cavities. So that caught my attention right away at Fosterville. What does it mean? It means we're in that epizonal regime. Hey, that's a great outcome. Okay, so I got very excited when I saw the vugs. And, I'm an excitable guy, so that got me cranked. But equally at Queensway, I looked at the core. We went there in late January, and I saw close up. Got my hand lens out. Vugs virtually everywhere. You can see similar vugs at Queensway on that far left-hand side to what we saw at Fosterville. And then also the gold occurs, in close association with those textures. That's remarkable. Okay, let's go over to the right-hand side. The nature of the gold itself is quite important. In orogenic deposits, as you go down in the crust, the gold particles in the deposits tend to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, they have more time and heat and so forth to crystallize and form and so forth. Up in the epizonal regime, you tend to deposit really tiny little particles of gold because this gold comes out very rapidly from fluids that are literally just shooting up through these fractures very quickly. Okay, when I see fine-grained gold like this in quartz veins, it tells me we're in the epizonal regime. So this, hands down, was the most solid evidence I saw at Fosterville that we were up in that epizonal environment. You can see all the little tiny flecks of yellow in there. That's gold. Okay, the same thing at Queensway, just innumerable little tiny points of gold. You know, that tells me we're in the right environment. Now, there's other things. Okay, the little gray flecks you see in there, those are various antimony minerals. And again, you see both of those, are antimony minerals in both deposits. All right, so again, that's telling you you're in that epizonal regime. If you think back to one of the first slides I showed, that dash SB, that's antimony. Okay, here you see it. There's gold and antimony together, which is a very, very good sign. Okay. All right, now I get to talk about the fun stuff, what's going on the project, and really talk about this discovery. I mean, this is an absolute delight. You can see here a map of the property. It's an enormous property position. I got to say, they've got control over a huge strike length along the Appleton Fault. This is the principal fault. That JBP fault is a secondary fault, but parallel to Appleton. You know, but both of these are those structures that I showed in that one cross section. These are the things that allowed those fluids to come up out of the ground. And the little structures that come off of this is where you find the high grade. You know, this is where you find gold was deposited. All those little tiny red triangles at the north end of this map in the blue area, which is really called Queensway North, those are prospects. Those are gold showings or prospects where people have found rocks, or they've done some drilling, or they found till samples or whatever. They found actual showings of gold, high-grade gold mineralization. Now down in the south there, where it turns yellow, across Gander Lake, that's what's referred to as Queensway South, that property. And then you see all the red blobs there. The red blobs are till sample anomalies. So they go out and they do grids of till sampling. Till is the material left behind after glaciers recede. Glaciers, as they push their way across rock, they kind of grind up stuff, and you end up with sand and gravel and whatnot, and they break up the in this case gold bearing veins and stuff. So you end up with a wee bit of gold in the till sample. So if you drill down and you take that till sample, you get a bit of gold in it. You can actually tell if there's a gold deposit somewhere nearby. In this case, this till has not moved like hundreds of miles or something. This stuff's moved, a few meters or a few tens of meters. Okay, so when you start to see till samples that have gold again and again and again, and you kind of draw a boundary around that, and you get very excited because somewhere in that vicinity, somewhere in that neighborhood, you've probably got an outcropping, prospect or showing of some sort. All right, so what do we see in the south there? Like a lot of big footprint till anomalies. And in fact, recently they at East Pond, they found some nice till samples where the gold is, very classic Hackley, like angular bits that is clearly derived from a local source. So we're very excited about the prospect that the mineralization, although it's more known in the north, is going to continue to the south. And we have the same style mineralization pretty much down the entire length of the property. In this case, you can see the properties, something like we got about 100-kilometer strike or so. That's a fantastic setting. Okay, now a little geology on the left-hand side of this image. You can see the gray rocks. Those are the sedimentary rocks, that accretionary prism or wedge that was kind of mashed up in the lecture I gave a few slides back. Okay, so those are our host rocks. Those are where these structures are that host this gold mineralization. You can see our tenement package. It pretty much encompasses that entire gray belt for about 100 kilometers and a bit. And then you see the big pink blobs in there. The pink blobs are actually intrusions. Those are, in this case, granitic intrusions that came up probably closely associated with the timing of the mineralization. I actually like to see intrusions like this come up while these systems are forming, because that provides an added component of heat, and sometimes it adds a component of metal too. You know, there's a suspicion that the fluids that come off the magmas themselves, they interact with the fluids that I was talking about earlier, and they help kind of supercharge, we'll call it, these types of gold systems. So whenever I see intrusions in this kind of neighborhood, I get quite excited. That kind of adds another element. You know, it's certainly a positive box to tick. Okay, on the right-hand side, you can see magnetic data. This is you know, done by air. They fly back and forth, very close spaced lines, and they collect magnetic data from the underlying rock in the ground. You know, all rocks have a bit of magnetism associated with them. And what you're seeing here is simply the pattern of magnetism in the ground. Pinks and reds are areas where there's high magnetism. Blues are areas where there's lower magnetism. What it's showing you is that you have these structural corridors. So what to look at here are the long linear, you know, magnetic lines that you see. Those tell you have very long, continuous structural zones in this setting. Okay, and that's important, because if you have just little tiny structural zones, you can't form big deposits. But here we see nice linear corridors, actually much akin to what you might see in some of the big prolific gold belts in the Superior Province or something like that. So we're not dealing with a kind of a small structural regime here. We're dealing with a nice big structural system that goes clear up and down the entire property. That's a very good sign. Okay, I'm going to talk just briefly about the setting of Queensway in context of what was going on around the world, you know, in ancient times. So we're going to wind back the clock here. You can see we're really back at, you know, at a stage in this early continent, as I talked about. You've got Gondwana, you know, you can see on the lower right-hand side, and Laurentia. Laurentia is another one of these ancient supercontinents. And really, this entire belt of gold deposits that's now, you know, been separated by the Atlantic Ocean. As the Atlantic Ocean opened up, you know, it's caused them to move apart from one another. But this entire belt of deposits, starting way down in, you know, really in North Carolina, in South Carolina, even, you know, you got the Hale deposit, for example. That belt comes all the way up through the eastern United States, goes up through eastern Canada, and you can see where Queensway is located. The Marathon project, you know, or Marathon's gold project, is located in Newfoundland, not too far away as well. It's, you know, obviously more advanced. It's, I believe, moving towards production, or it's going, or development, I should say, very soon. But this belt actually continues. So things like Dalradian, which is clear on the opposite side of the ocean now in Ireland, or Northern Ireland, that's another one of these things. Okay, so this belt generates some very prolific deposits. I think this is one of the most underexplored belts, you know, in terms of gold in our geologic inventory of places to go prospect, I'll say. I think this is a wonderful place. I think Queensway will really start to open up more prospecting in Newfoundland and elsewhere. I think, you know, people's brains are starting to clue into the prospectivity of this particular belt of rocks. But this shows you where it's at. It's in a big, you know, crustal suture, place where these plates collided, but way back in this Ordovician time. Okay, I'm going to now look at the northern part of our property area. We're going to zoom in on the North Queensway area and look in a little more detail at the prospects we have. So you can see a number of prospects here. All of these have, like I said, historic evidence, drill core, rock samples, so forth, of high-grade gold. Okay, you can see some of the numbers that are associated. Usually when it says, you know, X gram per ton over X meters, that means it's a drill interval. Okay, in some cases it might be channel sample or something like this, but it gives you a sense that there are some nice, it's not just somebody going up and grabbing a one-off rock sample. These actually are demonstrable intervals of mineralization that were encountered in historic time. Now, some of these samples are exceptionally high grade. You can see down there, for example, at Knob Zone, 2,130 gram per ton gold. Obviously, somebody saw a very high grade rock sample, grabbed it, and got a phenomenal assay. But at the same time, you have a 106 gram per ton assay over 2 meters. Okay, so don't discount the high grade rock samples either. These things, yes, in this environment you will find high grade rock samples, but when you see core samples or trench samples that kind of confirm significant width with high grade, then you get really excited. You can probably go up and high grade any property if you wanted to. You can probably go up and take high grade samples all day long on some gold properties. But this property already has demonstrable core intervals that are very high grade from historic time. Remarkable. To be frank, I have no earthly idea why this property was left here. Like, if I had these results back in when it was 80s, I believe it was, I would have been all over this thing. I know gold was like $325 an ounce back then, but who cares? These grades are incredible. Okay, now, the one assay I want to bring everyone's attention to is that Keat zone. Okay, right about in the middle on the right-hand side there, you can see the Keat zone. And the first reported interval underneath that label, 92.86 gram per ton over 19 meters. My goodness. I mean, let's think about this, right? So 92.86 gram per ton, that's nearly 3 ounces of gold per ton. And it's seen over an interval of 19 meters of core. And, what's the true width? Look, I've seen it. I think, the true width is not too much less than what is actually reported in the interval there. Okay, so, more drilling is needed to more firmly establish the exact orientation of this high grade. But from what I saw, just looking at the angle of the veins within the interval, it looks like this is a nice, robust interval of high-grade mineralization. 3 ounces per ton. I mean, we're talking about $6,000 rock, and it's really not even that deep. I mean, vertically below surface, we're talking about a few tens of meters below surface. Phenomenal discovery. What does it mean? Look, it's early stage. This is there's this hole. There's another one not too far away that encountered some significant, albeit lower grade gold. But having seen the whole development of Fosterville, I understand how small a volume you need to create a huge amount of ounces. Okay. Fosterville, for example, the Swan Zone, the Eagle and the Swan Zone combined, we're talking about a little over 1 million tons of rock. And because it's so high grade, it generated a huge amount of reserve for the mine. Okay. Like, you're talking like 2-3 ounces per ton, much like this. All right. So you don't need a huge amount of rock when you're dealing with these kind of grades. And oftentimes the deposits themselves can be very, very structurally delicate type systems. So we're going to talk a bit about that in a couple slides. Anyway, right now what I want to point out is it's not just the Keat zone that has this high grade. Look at the list of drill holes, most historic holes on the left there. You can see again and again and again very high grade results from a number of the prospects across this northern Queensway project. Okay, these are results that I like I said, I would not have walked away from. Why they were left sitting here for somebody else to come along and pick up, I don't know, but I'm very thankful they were, because we have them. Okay. Another thing I want to point out here is the assays from that high-grade zone. Okay, so this table actually presents the assays from the core hole that reported the 19 meters of 93 grams. And what you're seeing here on the left-hand side, that's the hole ID. So this was the first hole drilled in 2019, really the first hole that was drilled by Newfound while it was a private company. Sample ID, that's just the number that's assigned by the geologist to that sample interval. The next two columns you have from and to. That's length from X meters to X meters. Okay, so 96 meters to 97 meters. Okay, and then the next column, the one that's labeled with M, that is the length of core that was sampled. Okay, in most cases, the samples out of this zone were on the order of a half a meter or a meter length. Okay, so these, it gives you an impression. A meter is about 3 feet for the Americans who might watch this. All right, so we're talking about you know, a 3 foot down to maybe a 1.5 foot type widths of individual samples. Okay, now what's remarkable here is that you have a nice stout zone of gold. Yes, there's the very, very high grade core, and this quite frankly is the kind of stuff you would see at Fosterville. You know, a nice triple digit high grade core, sometimes quadruple digits even. But around it, you see a very, you know, discernible cloud of its lower grade. It's still pretty good grade, okay, you know, but that's what I like to see. I don't, when you start to see real discrete high grade, like just a high grade pop and there's not much around it, I get a little worried, because that means the system, yeah, it was able to generate high grade, but was it really big? Well, when you get into big systems, you see a big cloud, and that's what I see around this thing. Okay, so I think the structural, you know, conduit that allowed these fluids to come up must have been open for quite some time and allowed the fluids to kind of percolate outwards from this core high grade area, and you end up with this nice cloud of you know, substantial grade around it. That's a very positive feature. That's one of those boxes I tick when I'm looking at this system. All right, now I'm going to talk a bit about Fosterville. Now these images are a bit busy or complicated. I actually grabbed these off of some presentational material by Kirkland Lake. Top image, that is what we call a long section. It's basically a slice through the ground, looking at a profile of the deposit. Okay, the little open pit deposits that they mined early days are the orange things at the top, and then you can see these brown, you know, in the green zigzaggy line. That's those are the lodes as they plunge down into the ground. The way to think of these things, these look like, in profile, these look like a big long sword blade. Okay, that's what kind of geometry they have. Okay, so think of these lodes or these deposits as big long swords, or big long skinny, you know, fish like an anchovy or something, whatever you want, that extend downward into the ground. Okay, and you can see there in the core area of this Phoenix zone, they mine right from the bottom of the open pit. They continued mining this thing down, 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 down. Okay, now the pink down there towards the bottom, that's where they got into the high grade. That's actually where they started to see the high grade in the Eagle and then the Swan zones. And then they followed it down, and the thing started to plunge a little bit. So you can see in the two red circles there, the thing actually starts to roll over a wee bit. That's where the Swan zone occurred. But that entire pink interval way down there at the bottom is really where all of the ounces are coming from right now. You know, that's where they're focused on mining at the moment. Extremely high grades. You know, head grade of Fosterville here in recent time has been in the tens of grams per ton. What's astonishing, guys, is that all that stuff they mined up above, that was like 1 million ounces. Okay, the little pink bit down at the bottom, that's another like 3 million ounces. Okay, so it goes to show how much gold you can you know, stuff into a very small volume of rock when you're dealing with these kinds of grades. Now, what I want to draw your attention to are the two cross sections at the bottom. Okay, so what I did is I basically, again, clipped some images from Kirkland's materials, and they show the structural complexity of this high grade. Okay, so in the left image on the lower left, you see the little high grade structures. These are in yellow. The ones that have the visible gold and very high grades are in yellow, and it's kind of, think of it like a knot. Okay, again, notice how we're centered along a fold axis. In other words, all the rocks are buckled up there, and there's a structure kind of ripping through the whole thing. It's broken up that area like a little knot and allowed those fluids to come in. Now notice the thing that is really intriguing is that entire knot of high grade fits within a circle of about 100 meters diameter. Okay, so it's a very small profile, guys, very small. Go over to the right-hand image. This is actually a bit higher up above the Swan zone. This is where the Eagle zone. and the lower Phoenix are the main lodes, the high grade lodes. But those pink and yellow things, those are where the high grade is. Again, it's all confined within about 100-meter diameter circle, or so the entirety of the high grade is confined within a very small volume. You want to keep that in mind when you're exploring something like this. If you drill 100 meters above or 100 meters below or something, you're apt to miss a deposit like this, So you want to treat these things very delicately, and you also got to appreciate that they're very complex structurally. They're different fractures in the ground that are going at different angles. Right now, we don't know which way things are going. We just know we've hit one of these big blobs of very high grade. Okay, it's going to take a lot more drilling to figure out that geometry, and this is how you do it. So at Fosterville, what they do, because they have underground access, they can drill from underground. They drill holes up in different directions. They might drill some from the top, they might drill some from the sides. Basically, what they're trying to do is get as many holes across that high-grade area as possible so that they can start to connect the points and actually understand the geometry of the lodes or the actual individual fractures. They have to mine it. So you have to understand how it's oriented to get in there and actually dig out the rock. All right, so this is very, very critical. I bring this up because this is the kind of situation you have to deal with in these high-grade systems sometimes. You have to drill things, sometimes on the spacing of 10 meters or even less to really get a good handle on its exact geometry and orientation. Just, everybody that's invested in Newfound should understand this, because this is probably the way that Newfound is going to have to tackle this over time, is to do very, very close space drilling to fully understand what they have. Okay, here's a picture of where Newfound is at in the Keat Zone. Now, what you see here are a few historicals. In fact, the uppermost holes, there are historicals. These were drilled, I believe, in the 1980s, I believe, by Noranda. And they actually hit some nice intervals of, lowest grade, but, stout long intervals of gold. And again, this is a box I tick. When I see nice long intervals, that tells me the system had a lot of strength and time, probably, because the fluids had to make their way out into the surrounding country rock around the high grade to form such a cloud of lower grade material. Okay, but now the hole at the bottom there, the one with the bright pink, that of course is the first hole drilled. It's 1901. That's the one that was drilled late last year. Not sure it was November or December, but whatever. It was the one that encountered the extreme high grade. Okay, now we're looking down a length of maybe 300 meters here. So all these holes are not all right on top of each other. Okay, it's not like people drilled smack dab on top of one another. These are actually spaced in and out of this section for about, I think, 300 or 400 meters. All right, so what's intriguing here is that we now have latched onto that high grade system, but these holes, because they're further afield, like they're going down the strike of this thing, they tell us that there's got to be something more kind of lurking around, so the holes that are higher, that hit lower grade, are probably just telling us, that's a bit of a low grade smoke above something higher grade. That's my belief here. Okay, so I think that as we drill this thing, we'll learn more and more. I think we'll probably find that this high grade is occupying a complex structural environment. Which way it's going, we don't know yet. And I don't even want to pretend. It's going to take some serious drilling to figure this out. But the important thing is we see the big cloud, we see the high grade, and we already see quite a bit of strike to it. And don't forget, there's prospects up and down the overall strike of this system at the North Queensway that also hit high grade. So it's not like this is all we've got. We've got literally dozens of these things to come back and test it, and probably somehow they're all kind of connected together. I mean, obviously formed at the same time. All right, but what are we going to have to do? Well, in 3 years time, or well, maybe not that long, maybe 6 or 8 months time, I don't know. We're going to probably be drilling like this. And what I've done here is I've circled in yellow anything that's high grade, like tens of grams per ton, in the historic holes as well as this new hole that we have at the Keat Zone. Okay, so basically what I'm highlighting is this little complex spider web or knot of high grade. And this gives you an impression of how you might have to drill this thing. I'm not saying this is exactly how we're drilling it. I'm just giving you kind of a schematic view of how this is going to be approached. You're going to have to drill it from different angles, because invariably you're going to find some of the structures dip, in different directions. And, if you have a structure like this, that you can't drill parallel to it, you won't know it's there. So you have to drill from another angle to really get a handle on this. And, this is going to be the fun, I guess, of drilling this out. We'll have a lot of very nice intercepts, I can guarantee you that. But then we'll also have some where people are like, oh, they didn't hit anything there. Well, why not? It's because that hole was either above or below, or whatever. Like, you can't live and die by each drill hole. Okay, so this is a complex story that's going to take some good science, complex work, and a lot of drilling. But we have what is clearly a discovery of interest, and we will do our darndest to follow up on it. Okay, with that, I'm going to end my geo babble session, and hopefully I've given everybody a little better impression of what Newfound has, but also the potential here. I mean, this is truly an amazing project. The results, just even the surface work that's been done here recently that was talked about in recent news releases, is quite astounding. I'm very optimistic that we're in this sweet spot within these EPIZONAL orogenic deposits, pretty much down the entire length of the property. You have over 100 kilometers of strike length to explore. The first drill holes will test a number of these targets up in the North Queensway area. What do I expect? I expect a lot of good news out of a lot of different areas. It's not just the Keat Zone, but a lot of different areas. I think the entire, property is prospective. It's not just a one-off, one-hit wonder. So we're very happy to get underway. We have plenty of money in the bank, of course, to do this drilling. The company, of course, announced the 100,000 meter drill program. I mean, when you basically announce you're drilling 100,000 meters, that says you're drilling the pudding out of the thing. That means you're taking this pretty seriously, and I'm very glad to see that. They've got a very good team at site, led by Greg, and I think they'll do wonders.